in for the first time tonight, my name is Olivia Antsis, and I'm the Executive Artistic Director of the Gershman Philadelphia Jewish Film Festival. It is an honor to moderate this live discussion with the three talented gentlemen you see on screen. Now, before I introduce our special guests and we dive into Resistance, I want to thank IFC Films and Tamar Simon of Mean Streets Management for making this program possible. PJFF is grateful for the opportunity to offer our audience a more in-depth look at director Jonathan Jakubowicz's powerful and deeply moving film. I also want to take a moment to go over some simple housekeeping to ensure that tonight's 60-minute presentation runs smoothly and everyone has a great time. For those tuned in, I want to bring your attention to two buttons located at the bottom of your screen. The Ask a Question button allows you to submit any question you have for our panelists. You may also click on this button to vote on your favorite questions, the most popular of which will move automatically to the top and will be asked first during the second half of our discussion. Now, if you enjoyed tonight's program, we hope that you will consider donating to GPJFF by clicking on the donate button. Your contribution, regardless of size, will assure that our festival can continue offering free virtual programs like GPJFF in Conversation to film lovers like you year-round. Now, allow me to introduce tonight's distinguished guests. First, we are pleased to welcome Venezuela's most celebrated filmmaker, the writer-director of Resistance, Jonathan Jakubowicz. Jonathan's first feature film, Sequestro Express, is Venezuela's biggest box office hit. Nominated for Best Foreign Language Film at the British Independent Film Awards, the film was featured as a New York Times critic pick in 2005. Jonathan's second film, Hands of Stone, which stars Edgar Ramirez and Robert De Niro, premiered at the 2016 Cannes Film Festival, where it received a 15-minute standing ovation. In addition to his film work, Jonathan's 2016 debut novel, Las Aventuras de Juan Planchard, is on its way to becoming the biggest bestseller of all time for a Venezuelan author. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
All right, and I'm just going to make sure my sound is working. All right. Next, we are delighted to introduce the star of Resistance, Academy Award-nominated actor and acclaimed playwright and author, Jesse Eisenberg. Jesse has starred in many of my favorite indie films, including Roger Dodger, Squid and the Whale, Adventureland, The End of the Tour, Cafe Society, and of course, The Social Network, for which he received his Oscar nomination. Jesse is a frequent contributor to The New Yorker, the author of a short story collection called Bream Gives Me Hiccups, and the writer and star of the recently released Audible original radio drama titled When You Finish Saving the World. A film adaptation of the latter is set to star Oscar winner Julianne Moore and Stranger Things star Finn Wolfhard, with Jesse writing and directing. Thank you so much for joining us, Jesse.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Last but not least, we are so excited to welcome Géza Röhrig back to GPJFF. In 2019, Géza graced our stage to discuss his role in Sean Snyder's To Dust, where he played opposite Matthew Broderick. Naturally, after hearing his thoughtful take on Jewish mourning rituals, he has generated quite the following in Philadelphia. You may also recognize this Hungarian-born actor from his breakthrough role as Saul Auslander in the Academy Award-winning film Son of Saul. With a master's from both the Budapest University of Drama and Film and the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City, Géza has lived in New York since 2000. Like Jonathan and Jesse, Géza is a writer, and to date he has published 8 volumes of poetry and a collection of short stories. Thanks for being here, Géza. We're really glad to have this chance to chat with you again.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone feeling good? Can everyone in the audience hear everyone here on stage? Not that I can hear you guys, but I'm hoping that's a yes. All right. So I'm going to ask all of you to begin by just letting our audience know where you're tuning in from tonight.
I'm in Los Angeles.
Great.
I'm in southern Indiana in a college town. Forgive the bad internet connection. There's 40,000 college students all making bets on horse racing or something. Sorry.
I'm in the
And
Bronx.
Géza.
I'm in the Bronx, New York.
All right, wonderful. All right, we're beginning the conversation with Jonathan. Your interest in this little known but incredibly powerful facet of Marcel Marceau's life story has essentially brought us all here tonight. Can you talk about why it was important for you to make this film, and what effect did you hope it would have on its audience?
Well, I first heard about the story, and probably most people listening to us today, I had no idea Marcel Marceau was, first of all, Jewish and that he was a hero in World War II. So I immediately found it fascinating and started doing research. At the time, I was premiering my film Hands of Stone at the Cannes Film Festival, and I thought, since I'm going to France, maybe I can track down some of the protagonists of this story. And that's how I was able to reach George Loinger, the character Géza plays in the film. He was 106 years old at the time, and he was the head of the Jewish Boy Scouts of France during the war. And he's the one in the movie that brings Marcel into the castle to help with the children. And he was kind enough to receive me, and we spoke for a long time, and he told me a lot of the stories that you see in the film. And after hearing that and knowing how this story was never being told, I felt like there was nothing I could do with my life before I made this film. So that's what I did.
Great, thank you so much. And Jonathan, I have another question for you. Your grandmother is a Holocaust survivor. 4 of your relatives were saved by Oskar Schindler himself. Given what your family has went through during the war, this story it's so easy to see how it's personal and dear to your heart. In addition to being a source of inspiration and something you felt you had to make, maybe even cathartic on some level, in what ways do you believe this story is relevant to our time?
Well, it's definitely very personal. In fact, it's so personal. I never thought I could make a movie set in the Holocaust, because it's so emotional for me. I felt I could never be professional enough to tell the story. But what made me feel that this was the right story to tell and that I was going to be able to do it is that the story of Marcel is a story about salvation and not about extermination. It's so inspiring how they took responsibility and took it upon themselves to save the life of others, and actually were able to pull it off, that I felt it was about the light, in the worst possible darkness, and that made me relate to the event in a more hopeful way. And yes, it was absolutely cathartic. Like you said, we also shot in Europe, between Germany and the Czech Republic, which are, very close to this story for opposite reasons. My family is from Poland, but my grandfather went to the university in Prague, so it felt like I was walking through the stones my grandparents walked when their families were killed. So it was definitely very emotional. I mean, we were staying at an apartment that was a few blocks from Adolf Hitler's apartment in Munich, so it was constantly a presence that this story was more than a movie, and it felt like that. And what was the relevance of today? I mean, I think it's obvious, the intolerance is rising, and populism is rising, and it's the hatred of minorities never seems to go away. Specifically, the hatred of Jews is sort of back in vogue, and and I think it's extremely important to tell these stories and to reach new audiences. You know, it's hard to realize Schindler is a 20-year-old movie. You know, most people who are in their 18, 20 years old have never heard of Auschwitz. You know, so if we don't tell those stories will be forgotten. So I do think it's extremely important, and there is not a better part of history to be taught to make sure it never happens again, because it's extremely clear what led to the extermination of millions of people, and we are, you know, currently walking in a bad path, and it's important that we avoid it.
Thank you so much. And Jesse, I have a question for you. When you first heard from Jonathan and were asked to play the role of Marcel Marceau, what was your initial reaction? And after reading the script, what attracted you most to the story?
Well, my first reaction was I didn't know Marceau was a Jewish name. And then, of course, I discovered it's not. And he changed his name. The thing that surprised me wait, was that what you said? What surprised me the most?
What
Such a killer
attracted
joke. I
you
thought I
most
could
to
just
this
coast on
story
that.
after reading the
Oh,
script?
yeah. The thing that attracted me the most was probably this idea of like how to reconcile being an artist, you know, pursuing a profession that is self-serving and you know, kind of inward looking, as well as being a person who helps others and sacrifices themselves, even existentially, to save other people. And it's something I think about all the time because I'm an artist, you know, and I often am resentful of my profession because it feels kind of navel gazing. And it's exactly what Marceau is struggling to come to terms with, but in a much more extreme environment and under more dire circumstances. And so that's what I loved, because there's this great discussion at the heart of the movie is, you know, can you be self-centered and inward looking and also help others? And how does that affect your art? In the case of Marceau, he becomes a much better performer because he is performing for children who need to be entertained. And so it enhances his performance rather than compromises it.
Well, actually, you touched on two things that I'll be asking you about later on in our conversation. For now, I do want to ask you about playing a real-life character like Marcel Marceau. This isn't the first time you've done so. Your depictions of Mark Zuckerberg in The Social Network and Andrew Lipsky in The End of the Tour were absolutely iconic. For this role, how did you prepare to play? Yes, iconic. How did you prepare to play an unsung war hero who goes on to become a world-famous, beloved French mime? And what aspects of your character did you find the most challenging and conversely the most exhilarating?
Well, the difficulty of portraying somebody who is considered the greatest at something is that you have to look at least kind of credible to look like a kind of nascent version of that person. With regards to their skill set. So I studied mime for a long time, so I can kind of just look like I could become somebody who is the best mime, you know, 20 years after the fact. That was the kind of the challenge. But, you know, playing, a real life person has all these other advantages and kind of shortcuts. Wait, Géza, you just played God or something, right? Or Jesus? So or something. So you could relate to this. No, but like, you know, because there's all these, you know, because there are so many kind of true characteristics that you can kind of steal. I don't know how you did that, Géza, but for me, there was all these, like, you know, there's videos of Marceau doing all these interviews, you know, and so you can kind of get a sense of his, I would call it a kind of a confidence and panache. You know, I don't know whether or not to attribute it to him being French or very successful or just older than me, because the interviews that he's done are, you know, in his later years. But there are all sorts of wonderful advantages because you can kind of pull little things, you know. Oh, I like the way he kind of, you know, discusses himself with a certain kind of air of confidence or a certain kind of flamboyance, and then you can kind of put it in the character, or you can kind of use it to extrapolate and imagine why he does that, and, you know, and how does that infect the rest of his personality. And so there are some great advantages. Luckily, there's no video of Marceau, at the age that I'm playing him. No one is comparing me in any kind of, direct way to the image that they have in their minds, because he's not really a contemporary figure to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when I was watching the film, I could see you infusing the character with, these little comedic sort of flourishes, and I think every character actually had a moment of, some kind of like comedic, organic type of expression that came out. I don't know if that was, because Jonathan directed you to play the role that way, or that just came out as you got to know this character and got to live in the character.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cast of characters that are Jewish. So even though they're in this, the most unbelievably, horrific circumstances, mm-hmm. there's still a kind of self-awareness and even an occasional sense of irony. So that to me rings true of the culture. And then, Marceau is a hysterical performer. I often would, think that his performances remind me of like great stand-up comedy. He's just not using words, but he's a very funny person, self-aware, self-indulgent. And so even, under these horrific circumstances, there's still a kind of awareness, I would be curious to hear what Géza thinks, because, Géza's character is, I would say, probably the most sincere out of any of us. But, still, I think there's still some banter between the two of us. He still has a sarcasm. I think it's probably the nature of the culture.
And Géza, we're moving on to you now. So you play George, Marcel's cousin. How did you prepare for this role? Did you do any type of research? Talk about how you and Jonathan prepared for this role.
Well, having read the script, I right away Googled him and YouTubed him right away, of course, right away. And I found, significant material, more than I thought I would. And I learned French in high school, and I even followed some of his late interviews in French, trying to understand them, and to some degree I did. And he came across to me, and I'm really sorry that I wasn't able to meet him for a good while. The plan was, of course, to before the pandemic and everything, of course, to have him coming for the premiere, and finally to be able, to meet him and thank him and honor him, in person. But he passed away along the way, unfortunately. But what he came across to be is sort of an everyman. He's an unassuming man. He was a phys ed teacher, I think, most of his life. And you would imagine that you can't make a whole movie only about him. He would be sort of much less eventful as, his cousin's life, or his niece's life for that matter. I'm not sure if you know that who his niece was. Yardena Arazi, an Israeli singer who was a great choreographer. In any case, but you know what? Most behind or under the big attractive level of some of these stories, there is always, sometimes, most of the cases, a woman, in this case a man, who is sort of invisible, but so firm and so sticking to his values and doing what he can. And it was a relatively small role, but all the scenes were, I was very happy to bring him alive, because of course I'm just full of respect when it comes to George.
Yeah, he was also an unsung war hero in his own way, and I thought you brought his role a lot of grace and beauty.
That I don't know, but he was really a humble man too.
Mm-hmm. And what was the most rewarding experience you had on set or while you were preparing for the film? And did something during this time period affect your life in a way that changed you in some way, or was a transformative experience?
Well, I have to say, Jonathan is the most calm film director I ever met. I mean, he's like a big papa. It really felt, if the rain comes down unexpectedly, or anything happens on set, technical difficulties or this and that, he never ever lost his cool. And he was just having a relaxing atmosphere, a really good aura to work with. And so is maybe Jesse, I won't call him like a calm, but extremely dedicated, focused, a real actor, unlike me. And I try to, whenever I'm acting, I joined this wagon very late in my 40s. So I'm trying to pick up tricks, not so much tricks that would belong to any sort of routine that I'm planning to build, but more like behavior, how to relate, how attitude, so to speak. And so I formed a friendship with both of them, and I'm not saying this because they are present. And I also formed a wonderful friendship with Felix Moadi, I think that's how you pronounce his last name. A really great French actor. And so the experience was wonderful. This tiny town in Bavaria, Kronach, we spent there like 2 weeks, and it was really a day to day, brick by brick. We were making in this movie without any big, any conflicts or anything that sometimes bitter a shooting. When it comes to anything that changed my life, I don't know, changing my life. Does it have to be changed? Is it not?
No. It can be just a transformation of some sort, a realization of some sort.
I tell you what, it's related to the film. It's not actually from the shooting, I have to say, though. It's that I always had a certain level of discomfort with mime. I always viewed mime as sort of like ballet or opera. It was a little artificial to me. I no one behaves as mimes do, or opera singers who are singing while they are being shot, or there is a big knife in their heart and they are still singing. And I always felt that a little, and of course, ballet, I mean, just even to watch those jumps, I like, who would enjoy that ever? Even do it or watching it. I would never understand ballet goers, you know what I mean? And when I read this script and I started to learn about Marcel Marceau and listen to his interviews, his English was really good. He was touring like half a year in the US. He was extremely popular here. And as he turned out to be a real thinker and answered a lot of my questions about and sort of deconstruct my alienation about mime. And actually, I got really interested in mime in a way I would have never be without this movie.
All right. Thank you so much. And we're actually going to be talking about that later on. Okay, so Jonathan, you had the good fortune to work with an excellent cast. In addition to casting Jessa and Géza, can you tell us about the actors you've chose to play Emma, Klaus, and Elspeth? And if you can talk about what it was like working with the non-professional actors cast in the roles of the orphan Jewish children.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think casting is everything. You cast a great actor, then it looks like you know how to direct them. Because at the end of the day, so much is about them. I can tell you one by one. So you wanted Emma,
Elspeth, and Klaus.
And Klaus. So Clémence Bossy plays Emma. She's an incredible French actress. She was actually very passionate about this story because her grandmother was in the French Resistance. And I've been a fan of her for years. She was in an incredible movie called In Bruges, and I was blown away by her and have followed her career very closely. And I always wanted to work with her. So when we spoke and she told me about her grandmother, it was a no-brainer. And I think she brings a humanity and a strength to the role that I find against the stereotype. You know, she's not the innocent little girl that you usually find in a movie like this. She's in a way tougher than Marcel for most of the movie, and even in their biggest scene, she's the one arguing for violence, which I find very, very special. And the way she delivers it, it's very clear where she's coming from, and it's in a way the opposite of what you usually see in a movie, the woman calling the man not to be violent and to save children. We have the opposite here. Elspeth was played by Bella Ramsey, who is an incredible British actress, who her first role was in Game of Thrones as Lady Mormont, and she became a favorite of all the fans of the series. And she's a true genius, you know. And everybody who has worked with her can tell you that, you know, she really can go anywhere you need her to go, and goes from complete sadness to happiness in, you know, in a heartbeat. And it was a real joy to work with her, and her chemistry with the kids and her relationship with Jesse was incredible. And Matthias, who plays Klaus Barbie, was a risky choice in a way, because he is mostly known as a comedic actor in Germany. He's actually a superstar as a comedian in Germany. But I just saw some clips of him that really reminded me of the weird mix of charm and darkness that defined Klaus Barbie. And I felt I could take him there, and I actually went directly to him. He couldn't even believe it, because nobody really offers him serious roles in Germany. And I think it's part of what makes the role so special, you know, that he's got a face that is a comedic lead face, you know. He's a guy who's hard to hate, but he's so dark in the film that it really brings home what was one of my biggest goals with the movie, which is understanding that Nazis were human beings, and human beings are capable of absolute evil. Because I think the worst thing we can do is portray Nazis as monsters who are not related to anybody we've ever met. The more we bring them to us, and the more we acknowledge that these were people with families, with feelings, the more we are able to understand what happened, and that it could happen again because it was performed by human beings. And for him, it was very important too, because he is German, and he wanted to portray what happened as a nation of Nazis, not a group of crazy people who took over a nation. It was an entire nation that supported this movement, and how a man like Barbie would feel like a hero in that society. And I think he's really memorable, and I'm very proud that, you know, we went for the not so obvious choice, because I really think he took it to the next level.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Jesse, you were excellent with the kids, and you were training to learn the skill of miming for months and months. Can you talk about what it was like performing what you've learned in front of the children for the first time?
Yes, exactly what you had said. I was training and then just rehearsing on my own every day for the last few months, kind of just in a hotel room, you know, just practicing in front of a mirror, or with my mime teacher, I had a mime teacher in Europe and a mime teacher in America, because, you know, Hollywood. And I found at some point I really kind of hit a wall, you know, like you do with any new skill set. You know, feel at some point like you just can't go any further, you're not doing well, and the fun had been drained out of it for me, you know. And then we went on set to perform the scene where I performed for these kids who are kind of distraught in the castle when they're running around. And I had this amazing experience where I started performing, and the kids started laughing and interacting with me. These are kids who were all from Prague, and who many of them didn't speak English. So these are kids who I had spent a lot of time with, but didn't even have, you know, kind of conversations with. And suddenly we were interacting through this, unspoken language of mime, and they were laughing at me and enjoying it. And I had the same experience. It opened up something for me that had been closed, an enjoyment of the craft, an appreciation for the work I had put into it, and an appreciation for the true story, which is that, here is this guy who's performing these kind of fledgling one-man shows and dive bars, and then reluctantly, joins Géza's character to help out with these kids, and then finds his art. And it occurred to me in a kind of visceral and emotional way that if this is what happened to Marceau, it makes perfect sense why he would then dedicate his life to helping these kids and sacrifice himself, and why he would fall in love with his craft in the way that he did. As Géza said, he's performing, half the year on tour. And so, that's kind of, that was the revelation I had. And it was very special.
Thank you so much, Jesse. And Géza, how did your own life circumstances and background as a kindergarten teacher inform your experience working with the children?
Well, being a kindergarten teacher for years in Jewish schools was coming quite handy. I had another something in my background that helped me besides being Jewish, and that is that even though, unlike Jonathan or Jesse, my family do not go back to Poland, but my own personal roots, so to speak, go back to Poland, because that's where I went for university. And I lived in Poland, and I speak the language. And so we all, three of us, one from South America, one from North America, and one from Eastern Europe, we all have something Polish in our past or in our culture. And it's quite important for me. I became, so to speak, an adult in Poland. And just a little interesting thing, which I thought I'm going to share with you tonight, is that 2 weeks ago, I met a Polish man who is a very close friend of Marcel Marceau's second wife. And I'm not sure if you know that Marcel Marceau's second wife was a Polish woman for 10 years, and they remained great friends, and she herself is a mimist. And his name is Emma Jaroszewicz. And it was just a very interesting thing with sitting in a garden party and talking with the Polish person, and it turns out that the Olam Katan, the world is just really small, because here is Marcel Marceau's second wife's close friend with me. And so a lot of things so to speak held me, but most of it to me was the real respect or homage I felt for George and people like him, people who generally remain in the background, and people who yet still the motor, with the drive of the whole operation. I don't think this would have ever happened without George.
Thank you. And Jonathan, can you talk a little bit about your writing process? Being that Resistance is based on true events, I'm sure that you had to navigate how you were going to tell an entertaining story, but still keep the authenticity and the truth of who Marcel Marceau was.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest challenge is that it takes place in 7 years, so we have to make a coherent tale in 2 hours, and in what I did was combine a lot of events and really focus on the dramatic transformation of this character and where he goes from beginning to end. As far as the process goes, I mean, I usually just do a ton of research at the beginning. I went to school for journalism, so I have a very journalistic approach to research, and I meet with as many people as possible. I met George Loinger. I met with the Nazi hunters, Klarsfeld, who caught Klaus Barbie in Bolivia after the war. I read every book. I went to the Museum of the Resistance in Lyon. I went to the Yad Vashem in Tel Aviv.
Jerusalem.
And what?
Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem. um, and I obviously, read every possible book and met with as many members of this story as possible, and then really, with all the knowledge of this researchers, tried to write a screenplay that makes sense. And the first version is obviously a 4-hour movie, and then you start narrowing it down and narrowing it down until you really get to the core of what you need, and then the combination of events in one event give you what you need to tell the story. And then Jesse came on board, and it was a very good collaboration because he also gave a lot of input to the character and to the situations, and we worked in the script for months during the when while he was training as a mime, and then in pre-production we started doing rehearsals with the rest of the actors and also changing the script as we were rehearsing. And then when you're editing, you keep changing stuff that's really part of the screenplay, so it never really stops. And happily you end the movie and then you can't change anything else, because otherwise I would probably be changing it still.
Mm-hmm. And the filming locations that you used were very striking, but also steeped in history. Can you specifically talk about 2 locations in the film? The abandoned swimming pool in the hotel where Klaus would torture members of the resistance, and also that vast hall where Jesse ends up performing as Marcel, and General Patton is addressing his troops.
Well, the location of the swimming pool was in Nuremberg. We were looking for a place where Barbie could do his executions, and the obvious choice was the typical wall that we've seen in all the World War II movies. But I always try to do something a little more specific, and we found this piece of research that said that they did a lot of executions and tortures in the swimming pool of the hotel terminus, and it just blew my mind. It was, I think, one of the last locations we found, because it's not like you come up with, oh, let's find an abandoned pool and then you find it. It's not easy to find an abandoned pool. And then when we found this place, it was unbelievable. It was actually one of the reasons we decided to shoot in Nuremberg, was that we found this incredible place, and then we decided to find other locations around it. And the other location that you mentioned that begins and ends the film with Marcel's performance is the Congress Hall, which was sort of a coliseum that Hitler was building for himself. It was like the size of the New Orleans Superdome for 50,000 people with a podium in the middle. So basically a temple for a one-man show. And that man was meant to be Hitler, but he didn't finish it, and because he lost the war. But it was never demolished, so it really has some sort of a coliseum quality to it. And this is in Nuremberg, in a place that is inches away from where the Nuremberg rallies used to take place. And the idea of doing this art, this pantomime of a Jewish artist by a Jewish actor in a Jewish director's film in a temple that Hitler was building for himself, truly felt like a creative vengeance against him and against the Nazis. On top of that, we were working with a mostly German crew, which gave it, another dimension of meaning, and it was a very special night for all of us.
Yeah. And I have just 2 more questions for Géza, and then we're going to start with some audience questions. Géza, I read that while you were in university, you visited Auschwitz as part of a study tour, and you've also published 2 collections of poetry on the theme of the Shoah. What lessons or insights have you gleaned from those experiences, and how have your recent roles in what I consider to be 2 very different Holocaust films affect your understanding of the Shoah and its reverberations today?
Nice, big questions. Well, my grandfather put draw a little map of the camp for me, and I tried to prolong my visit. I was a university student in Warsaw, and honestly, I had too good a time to interrupt it by visiting Auschwitz. These were the times of the early 80s, when the Solidarność was super active. The whole Polish society was in resistance mode, no pun intended. And so there were lots of anti-communist activity, mostly around forming punk and rock and roll band, and I was too involved with that. But so like about the last weekend before I left Poland, I thought that I owe this to my grandfather, and I trained to Auschwitz, and I don't want to make this long. So, but what really happened with me there is what meant to be a one-day visit turned out to be a month of staying. I rented an apartment in Oświęcim, the town that is Auschwitz called today, and I visited the place every day from opening to closing. It was still under Soviet supervision, very different scene that it is now, which is touristic and back then, especially it was in December, back then it was like a handful of visitors. When the first time I went there, it was between Christmas and New Year. So you can imagine, almost empty whole day. And that sort of solitude and snow really took me. And that's I'm a religious Jew, and I have to say that I decided in Auschwitz to go to Israel. I really have to be brief here because this is about our movie, Resistance, and not about my life. But just basically what happened is that I wanted to become like the people who were murdered there. And since most of the people who were murdered there were believers, and I, growing up in a communist country, had not much idea about my heritage. I wanted to know more. I wanted to be circumcised. I wanted to know Hebrew. And so from Auschwitz, from Poland, instead of going back to Hungary, I went to Israel. Make a long story short, I think let's leave it like that and just have some questions because it's too big a topic.
Okay, well, I'm going to skip my next question. Maybe we can get back to it later, but I'm going to ask an audience question. Okay. All right, we have 10 votes for this, so it's going to be a really good question. I'm curious about specific details in this powerful film. Did General Patton really talk to his troops regarding Marceau and having Marceau perform in 45? Is Barbie's murder of Mila with her sister Emma watching based on actual specific sisters who were in the resistance? And more generally, what were the main sources of your background research? Were there any journeys of escape to Switzerland or Spain that Marceau or others in the French resistance led that failed?
Okay, so that's like 5 questions. So let's go one by one. What was let's start again.
General Patton really
General
talked to his troops and have Marceau perform
there
in
is
45.
a very famous when Marcel received the Wallenberg Medal of Honor, he specifically talks about this event and how it was the first time he performed, and the first review he got was in the Stars and Stripes magazine of the Armed Forces in regards to this event. What happened is that Marcel was a liaison officer. He was a translator for the Americans in Germany, because Marcel spoke fluent English, German, Yiddish, and French. So he was very helpful for the Americans. And they were constantly trying to entertain their troops. This is after the war, so there's no combat, but there's a lot to do, but there's no combat. So they were constantly trying to entertain them. And Marcel, pitched himself as an actor and started doing all this pantomime. and it's true. That's the way it happened. Whether it was 3,000 troops or not, it's something we have to believe Marcel. He may have remembered it more exciting than it was, but we portrayed it the way he described it, so that's how we did it. The murder of the sisters is based on true stories. The names of the sisters is fictional, because I wanted to respect, those on which I based them, because it's not exactly the way their lives was. But yeah, I mean, and Barbie has an incredible amount of testimonies about his killings. There is an amazing documentary called Hotel Terminus, which was actually nominated for the Oscars, and I think it's like 4 hours of testimonies about Barbie, and you can see parents of the children he killed, and it's pretty horrific. And whether there are missions that failed, I'm pretty. There's no mission that Marcel was involved that failed. Whether some other missions failed, they ended up saving 10,000 children. You don't save 10,000 children in missions of 20 to 40, overnight. So I'm sure there were missions that didn't end up resulting the way they wanted. But they were mostly successful, and they changed their routes every time and their techniques. There's an incredible story of a soccer field that was in the border between France and Switzerland, and the kids were playing soccer, and one by one they were leaving the court, because at the end of the court was the other country. So at some point, the other team found themselves playing alone because the entire team had left, and they had all these stories, and George was, an endless source of these stories. And you could make 100 movies about this, because one is more, harrowing and stressful than the other.
Thank you so much. And our next question comes from Linda Collins. What happened to the girl later in life who saw her parents shot in the beginning of the movie?
Well, I made a decision because I was unable to talk to any of the children that Marcel saved specifically. So instead of coming up with a fictional one, I based their story on the story of my aunt, the sister of my mother, who survived the war by hiding in a monastery, in a Catholic monastery, and singing Ave Maria, and a lot of what you see is basically her story. And her father was killed in the Krakow ghetto, and she's fine. She's living in Miami, and she saw the movie at the premiere and loved it, and she's great.
That's wonderful. And we have a question from Paulette. How did it feel to act in the inhumane, cruel, barbaric scenes? I believe this question would probably be best answered by Géza or Jesse.
Well, we were not really in like the terribly,
Yeah, that would be the girls.
Yeah.
Maybe during the scene where you witnessed, Emma, finally passing away, or just, the scene on the train, maybe. I know you weren't in the real terrible, cruel scenes.
Well, there is, I have a, one dialogue scene with Klaus Barbie, and it is an unusual experience in that, as Jonathan stated earlier, that actor, Matthias, is a really wonderful actor and is very charming and charismatic, and known in Germany for being a kind of comic actor. And yet here he is in this, Nazi uniform, and he has a kind of, a terrifying look behind his eyes. And, as an actor, you're kind of, you're not a crazy person, so you know it's fictional. But there was something unnerving about this charming man in this Nazi uniform, you know, kind of eyeing these children, and yet at the same time asking me a kind of, you know, seemingly sane question about how to raise children. And, you know, it's that kind of cognitive dissonance that I imagine probably a lot of people felt, you know, as that country spun into pure insanity.
Yes. And Géza, do you have anything to add?
Not really, to be honest. I don't think I had scenes with any real cruelty.
Okay, moving to Robin Katz's question, did Marcel's brothers survive his work with the resistance?
Yes, Marcel's brothers survived and actually helped Marcel with his financing, you know, for decades, and became sort of a business partner with Marcel, and you know, they were very close for the rest of their lives.
Thank you so much. And I believe this is from my colleague, Matt, from the festival. Did Marcel actually have a girlfriend who died as it was portrayed in the movie?
Well, he had a very close female friend who died, and whether she was a girlfriend or not is something that even in the movie it's left open. You know, the love never really materializes, and it's something that George mentioned, that, you know, was Marcel, you know, was someone very special for Marcel. He was very young and at the time, and it's hard to exactly say if there was a love story or not, and that's why we left it open in the film. But he definitely had, you know, someone very close to him that died. Many people, you know, but specifically a girl in which I based the story.
Mm-hmm. And from Steve, this is for Jesse. How much of the stunts did you do yourself, especially the hiding in the tree?
I was tied to a tree for, I think, 2 days in a row. So I don't know if that's a stunt or a kind of hostage situation, but I was in the tree.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's move on here. Sorry about that. This just froze. Okay. From Raquel, what in the, well, I believe we actually answered this one. I'm going to just skip that. Okay. Let's see. Okay. From Mara, is there any footage of Marcel Marceau talking about this specific part of his life?
The best I found is when he received the Wallenberg Medal of Honor, and he gives a very lengthy speech and talks about it in a lot of detail. I don't think there's much before that, because he never really liked to talk about it. You know, I think he had no choice but to do it in that award ceremony, because he was being given a medal because of this. But he was very reluctant to see himself as a hero. He was the kind of survivor who felt so many people died around him, and so many people did so much more than him, that he didn't think he did anything more than the right thing and the normal thing to do, which is helping others in a time of need. And he didn't speak about it for many years, and when he did, he spoke about it very modestly. He in fact said that the silence in his art, he realized later in life, that resembled the silence of the survivors of the concentration camps. It was an entire generation that didn't like to talk about things, and he felt in a way that he, with his art, was able to not talk about it, but, you know, communicate it. And that's why it's so limited what the source is. But in that speech, and you can find it online, it's pretty substantial, and he goes into very exciting detail.
Can I just add something to that, which I just learned from, again, a close friend of Marcel's second wife? I'm not sure if any of you know that Marcel Marceau died on Yom Kippur.
Yeah.
Which is traditionally a sign of being righteous. So he was a righteous man, so was George.
Wow.
Yeah, I
That's
remember
very
that.
interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Something that I want to just go back to, there's a conversation that Marcel has in the film with the woman that was sort of helping him or with him when he was creating those passports for the resistance. And they have this conversation about Jewish painters, and she says that it's not your people's forte, and you know why? Because your religion doesn't let you draw God, which is also why so many people hate you. They get afraid when they can't see who you're praying to. I wanted to ask you about that line, and also what Marcel responded, which I can read if you don't remember exactly.
You know, there is, when you do research about a story like this, you come across so many theories that try to explain anti-Semitism. Everybody who is involved in the war has a theory, and I found that theory doing research about the French resistance, that there was this woman who said that, and I thought it was fascinating, and I thought it was a very good insight into what the conversation that follows. You know, Marcel simply replies, they hate us because for centuries they've been told that we killed Jesus Christ. You know, I mean, it's inevitable to at some point, you know, speak about this. You know, the notion that most of the world, or half the world, is was educated for centuries that Jews killed God, you know, is a significant starting point to create generational anti-Semitism, you know, and that is an essential part of the research that I did in regards to German anti-Semitism in particular. It was part of the religion, you know, and but what she answers, you know, I find very deep and fascinating, and it's also from my research on the French resistance, that Jews are emancipated slaves, and that the original myth of Jewish culture is the exodus of Egypt. You know, it's a group of slaves that liberated themselves to create their own society, and that is why they are something oppressors are afraid of, because oppressors want their people to be slaves, and then suddenly there is this people whose holy book tells them that they can't bow to anyone but God, and they are the people who were able to leave slavery. And it became, you know, a bit of a theme for the film, because these guys are liberating these children. They're liberating themselves from the slavery that the Nazis were imposing on them. And I feel that there is something in that moment when Marcel hears about it that connects to the revelation he has much later in the film, in which he realizes that the resistance is survivor, and it's saving people, and it's freedom. And I just think it was part of the process of Marcel reaching that conclusion.
Yeah, thank you. And getting back to painting, Marcel was a Jewish artist with a penchant for painting. In addition to acting, which I imagine, Jesse, you consider your primary form of artistic expression, you also write plays, radio dramas, and short stories. Can you talk about how immersing yourself in these different art forms has influenced who you are as an artist?
Well, as an actor, I would never have been able to conceive of this movie. Jonathan took a kind of kernel of a true story and then did a ton of research and then used his imagination to create this thing that is like a cohesive story with characters and plots. This is a skill set I just don't have. So as an actor, I am kind of thrust into this world and and living in it for months. And, so then when I'm going to do my own things, just a world of possibilities opens up that is outside of what my, narrow purview would have been. So I have this great advantage of, like, as an actor, kind of being thrust into living in other people's creative spaces. It's really beneficial to me. And as a writer, it's in some ways it's kind of like made me ease up as an actor. I find a lot of actors, including, me, have this sense frequently that you're, kind of not in control of your own fate. Other people are choosing to put you in a movie and then editing you down and then, and then marketing you in a way that feels maybe inconsistent with how you see yourself. That's unnerving. But, since I started like writing my own plays and acting them, I kind of have eased up on feeling out of control. I think a lot of actors have that when they kind of journey to other aspects of the entertainment industry, because you no longer have the sense that your fate is in, an industry, a fickle industry's hands.
Thank you so much. And this actually connects to what you just said. You're about to embark on your directorial debut of When You Finish Saving the World. While shooting Resistance, were there elements of Jonathan's directorial style on or offset that resonated with you and served as a source of inspiration?
Well, I basically asked Jonathan every shot, why are we doing the shot? Why are we doing the shot? So I can learn. Maybe it was annoying to him, but Jonathan is, like, as Géza said, very kind of calm. So I know with directors like that, I can learn, because it's not going to, because I know I'm a nervous person. So if somebody was asking me, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? I would assume it was always because I'm doing it wrong. And so, but Jonathan's very calm and he has mapped out the whole movie. So I knew I could kind of ask him every question. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And yeah, Jonathan, well, the movie I'm doing is very different to Resistance. Resistance is very broad in scope. It's an epic story with, 20 characters. Mine is, tiny story. So it doesn't require that much kind of direction, or it requires, let's say, direction of actors, but I don't have to kind of consider camera stuff in the same way. So Jonathan did stuff like, we would be filming a scene that is 6 seconds long, but it would take all day to film because, for example, there's the scene in the square that's heavily featured in the movie trailer, so you can watch it quite easily, where we are running from the Nazis, but I also get this flamethrower and use it to save my brother. And, it took, I don't know, a day to film that one quick thing that's over in 7 seconds. And it was really interesting for me, because Jonathan is very, very methodical. So he told me, yeah, I said, why is the camera 7 stories up in the air? And he's, on an angle. He said, well, because that's to get scope. And also so that when you're cutting a scene that's active, you want to have multiple angles. Stuff like that was interesting to me, but I would say not exactly relevant to my production. The thing that was more relevant to my production, which I absolutely loved, was Jonathan works with this great cinematographer who is who has worked with him on other projects. And what they would do, which is something I would absolutely love to do, is they kind of started shooting scenes right away. They were good at working spontaneously, which means, and I'll compare it to a more typical experience. More typical experience is actors go on set, they rehearse the scene, they figure out exactly where the camera would go, and then by the time they're shooting it, as an actor, I have to say, by the time you're shooting it, it feels stale. You know, as an actor, the emotions feel forced because you've done it so many times, and the technical aspects have been worked out. What Jonathan and Miguel, the cinematographer, did was kind of start shooting almost right away. And I would ask Jonathan, like, how you know that's going to be good? He's like, it'll be good, and we're also going to get these other angles. And they start moving the camera around, and it just created this feeling of like spontaneity in me that, oh, now the camera's over here now. Okay, I can try something else. I've never seen that before, and I would say it was the most like kind of I would say feeling. It inspired the feeling of the most freshness that I've experienced. My acting never felt like, oh, I know exactly why we're doing this angle, and I know if I screw it up, it's not going to be in the movie because the camera. You know, it was spontaneous and fresh. I would love to be able to do that. I don't know that I have the necessary skill set, but that's what I like the most.
Well, I'm glad that this experience was also a mentorship for you, and Jonathan was such a wonderful mentor. I think any would-be director would absolutely love to have this type of learning opportunity right before they were going to direct their first film. So thank you. And we have one last question from the audience, and then we're going to wrap up our evening. For Jonathan, Géza, or Jesse, which book or books would you recommend the most to learn about the Shoah, and which book or books were most helpful in each of your research?
I have it here somewhere. I always forget the name of the author. There is a book called The Holocaust: A New History. It is, I think, the best. Let me find it. Lawrence Rees.
Oh, sorry.
Lawrence Rees. Lawrence Rees. The Holocaust: A New History. I find it extremely important because he doesn't focus on what happened. He focuses on how he got there, and really goes year by year, month by month, explaining the genesis of the Nazis and the strategy that Hitler used to get the German people to accept what he ended up doing, and it's really, I think it's very special because it really made me understand. And from the beginning, when I approached this subject, the hardest part is to understand, how does an entire nation accept the extermination of their neighbors? And that book really got me closer to understanding it.
Thank you so much. And I see that Steve put a link to the book in the chat. And Jesse, do you have anything to add?
Well, I could cite two movies the two movies that I watched happen to have our co-stars in them. Géza's movie Son of Saul, and the actor who plays my father was in a wonderful Austrian movie called The Counterfeiters. It also actually, I think, maybe won the best international movie. And that is, his name's Karl Markowitz, and that's a great movie as well. And Géza is, I would say, amateur, or maybe not amateur, historian, so he would know
amateur
way more as well.
Amateur in the sense that the word is etymologically coming from amore, so I love history. So that in that sense, I'm amateur.
What is? Oh yeah. Well, yeah. She was asking about any kind of what books do you recommend to teach about the Holocaust or that were helpful to you?
Oh, Primo Levi, by far. I think he's the best.
Oh yeah.
Everybody's getting so understandably, of course, especially survivors' testimony, a bit too what's the right word? Traumatized, sometimes sentimental, melodramatic, which emotional basically. And Primo Levi was a chemist, and he was really he had a better share in the camp than most did, because he had the occupation they actually needed, and that sort of welfare allowed him to try not just to feel but to think about it really hard. And of course, later, I mean, not of course, but he committed suicide at the end of his life. But Primo Levi, I think all of his books are the ones that talking to me the most about what happened.
Thank you, Géza. And Jonathan, before we go, because we're running out of time, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to bring up to our audience?
I mean, I guess what I think is important in this day and age where we all feeling that we are going through a horrible moment in history because of the epidemic and everything that's going on. I think this movie can encourage us to first realize that things were a lot worse very recently, but also to not despair and feel that there are things you can do to change the lives of others around you. And you may feel that the problems of the world are too grand for you to make a difference. But if there's anything that Marcel and his group proved in this story, is that you can make a difference by helping those next to you. And I think this is a very important feeling to realize in this day and age where everything seems too big to handle. That's how I handled the epidemic, you know, by focusing on the small things, and hopefully this movie will invite people to do that.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was wonderful to hear. Thank you to Géza. Thank you, Jesse, for being here. And thanks to our audience for joining us. And I just want to take a moment to apologize for our technical difficulties in the beginning. I actually heard a very huge echo throughout this program of my own voice, so I had to keep muting myself. And I apologize if that sounded weird in this presentation. But thanks everyone for bearing with me on that. The one thing I wanted to mention is that I'm sure that Jonathan, Jesse, and Géza would love for you to all help spread the word about this film. So if you enjoyed it, if you think other people should see it, please post on Facebook. Please tell your friends to rent this film, to purchase this film. But please help spread the word. And I hope you all stay safe. And please do not forget to vote this November. We need each and every one of you to vote, no matter what. Vote as if your life depended on it. So thank you all again for joining us. It was wonderful to see this film and to gain some more insight into your process. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.